I'm joined now by Christo Aivalis. He's a historian and co-host of the podcast Left Turn Canada. Now let's change a bit to other parties here. So the Conservatives. I've heard a lot of fake working class appeal from Erin O'Toole, whether it's on pensions, on unions. What are your thoughts on, do you think people are able to decipher the fact that he is full of crap, or is this messaging, is it working on people? I mean, you're seeing, I think it's brilliant of him to try and do this, to try and go after, try and pretend to be the working class voice, when clearly, based on their history, based on what is actually in his platform, that's not the case. But by faking that language enough, do you think it may actually help him?
I mean, I don't know if it's ultimately going to work, but he's running the kind of campaign that I think could succeed, right? Like, it's not guaranteed to, but it's the sort of campaign that I think the Conservatives needed to try to run, which is to say, to at least feign like we are not that different from the Liberal Party. We are really moderating on these social issues. We still care about workers. We care about women's rights, the LGBTQ community. We care about, the religious and ethnic diversity of this country, and we celebrate it. And that's the kind of thing that is essential to getting those like suburban voters in Toronto and in other urban areas that the Liberals in recent years have just mopped up on. Right. Mm-hmm. And those are the swing voters, because the rural voters, by and large, vote Conservative. The big city voters, people in the downtown cores, will usually vote NDP or Liberal. And so those suburban areas are like the swing ridings, similar in the United States in many ways, where Biden was able to pick up back some of these suburban, smaller town areas from Trump. And that's something that O'Toole is trying to do. But I don't know if it's working for a few reasons. One, people don't trust him necessarily. His approval ratings aren't any higher than Andrew Scheer's. He's polling a little bit lower than Andrew Scheer was. And it seems to be that while he has been able to bring Liberal votes to him, he's also lost some to the PPC, right? Because if you look at the polling early in the campaign, Liberals started crying about strategic voting. Right, the Canadian, you have to vote Liberal to stop Erin O'Toole. But what the graphs were clearly showing was that as soon as the election was called, the NDP was more or less steady in the high teens, low 20s. But like a bunch of Liberal voters swung to O'Toole. And that's where most of the movement has been, except for maybe, a PPC rise. And so he's trying to walk that knife's edge. And I don't know if it's going to be quite enough. Although, if you told him 6 weeks ago when the Liberals were facing a majority victory, maybe he's been successful at, stopping that. And I mean, his policies, they're incoherent, because that like worker representation on company boards, that's a good policy. I don't actually disagree with that. But then he still supports like a lot of union busting measures, like getting rid of dues checkoffs and things like that. So he wants to give workers representation, but he wants to destroy unions, which are the main form of worker representation, or at least weaken unions. And he says he supports workers, but then he doesn't support the National Child Care Program, which is one of the most important things that working families, but working women in particular, need to, fully participate in the economy. And so I don't know if the hodgepodge is fully convincing people, although he hasn't necessarily blown it either.
Yeah. And as you mentioned on the cultural issues, the more social issues, he is trying to sound a little more like the Liberals, which I think has given now a clear opportunity to the PPC, the People's Party of Canada. And you're seeing their rise here. So they're at 7% right now in this Nanos research poll, up 5% from the last election. And, Maxime Bernier, the leader of the People's Party, failed to win his seat last time. I kind of thought at that point they're going to, fizzle away, but they're back and stronger than ever. And I drove through Oshawa, which is a suburb of Toronto, about an hour out of Toronto, a couple weeks ago. And I saw PPC signs all over the place. Like it was a little striking. So what are your thoughts on how they've been able to sort of, grow their support? And do you think there's a potential here for maybe Maxime Bernier to win his seat, or someone else to become an MP in the People's Party? And do you think they have any ability to sustain this support based on how they're going right now?
I mean, yeah, I wasn't necessarily 100% convinced that they were like dead in the water after Bernier lost in 2019. He lost his seat, but it did seem like they had some excitement and momentum right when he first launched, but they just weren't able to convert it. And I think that a couple things worked in their favor this time. One, there was the if only in rhetoric, the shift of Aaron O'Toole's Conservative Party. And the shift of Aaron O'Toole's Conservative Party to be like less controversial on guns and gays and women's rights and pro-choice, anti-choice debates and all that stuff, gave more room on the right. So like Maxime Bernier and PPC operatives could like take those more right-wing positions and then not really have anyone else competing with them for those voters. And another thing has to be COVID. Like COVID changed the game.
For sure.
It saved the PPC probably because they are the only party. I know there are like fringe elements in the Greens maybe or whatever, but they're the only party that's like 100% like COVID denialism.
Yeah.
They got like the anti-maskers. They got all of the people that are like, I don't trust the science. They have all of the people that didn't support any of the shutdowns.
Yeah.
You add all of that up, the mainline Conservative Party, I mean, Aaron O'Toole hasn't been as strong as he needs to be, but he has removed certain people from his caucus like Derek Sloan for being absolutely bonkers. And so his party has taken a largely pro-science position, if not fully. And so it's created this conglomeration of, are you tired of the conservatives being far too towards the center? Are you tired of the government imposing its will on you with this pandemic? Join the PPC. And I think that's why they've gotten a lot of support from the conservatives, but not exclusively from the conservatives, because anti-vaccination views are more prevalent in the conservative movement, but they're not exclusive to it.
Yeah, and we've seen that, I think, with the drop of the Green Party. I don't think it's just because of Annamie Paul and her leadership. There's elements, as you mentioned, the fringe elements of the Green Party members that are very, anti-vax. They question which, a lot of the anti-vax stuff from the so-called left are people who have an honest mistrust of big pharma, which I think is correct in a lot of ways. But then they apply that to everything. They apply that to every which includes vaccines. So clearly there is that disconnect from reality there that has now benefited the PPC. If that's the issue you care most about is the vaccine mandates, then you're going to be more willing, more open to support the PPC and completely ignore, the racist, bigoted elements of the PPC if you're that kind of voter. So getting to the Green Party, I mean, what do you think about their complete drop? Like, what do you think has led to this? And what do you see as a Green Party? Like, what's the Green Party going to be moving forward potentially after this election?
I mean, I think there's a bunch of reasons. I do think they've lost some people to the PPC, but it seems like they've mostly gone to the NDP. I think that's probably the case. If you look historically and recently at like second choice support, like who do Greens have as their second choice? It's mostly NDP and then Liberal with a decent amount of conservatives too, but like mostly NDP and Liberal. And so I think that's one of the reasons why the NDP has made gains in this election, is that they've taken some of those voters. It's just been a mess. Yeah. It's been a mess. Like I noted this, back on YouTube and in my writing and stuff, that, when Elizabeth May left, it was going to be a major make or break moment for the Green Party. Because whatever you say about Elizabeth May, if you like her or you hate her, she was able to take like a nothing party and win some seats, not just in BC, but even one in Fredericton. And then because of that success, I honestly think that that's the reason you've seen Green success provincially in like New Brunswick and PEI, a little bit here in Ontario, a lot in BC as well. And when she left, it was like, okay, so what's the party vision going to be? And you had the Lascaris vision, which was like, green socialism, eco-socialism. And then you had Annamie Paul, who was more or less going to be like the continuation of like the centrist Green Party, you know, on like probably a little bit more to the left of the Liberals, but not by much. And I don't think that inspired people. And I just clearly the Israel-Palestine thing just tore them apart, right?
Yeah.
Like the response to that with Jenica Atwin, where her staff attacked one of their MPs and then she didn't defend the MP. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know where they go from this. I think that there's a real risk that they could be reduced to one seat. I don't see May losing her seat, but I do think Paul Manley is in trouble, not necessarily any fault of his own. It's just the polling's really bad for them. And the NDP's polling quite well in BC, and those combinations could actually flip that seat back to the NDP. And where they go from here, I'm not sure. I mean, they could maybe this is another shot for Lascaris to run, who didn't finish all that far behind Paul, but it could be, you know, the slow decline of the Green Party, and maybe they kind of lose relevance as a federal party. That could happen too, because who knows what happens after Elizabeth May retires? Is that a Green Party seat or is that an Elizabeth May seat? And then do they have no seats? I don't know.
Yeah, and with Annamie Paul still running in Toronto Centre.
Yeah, that was a bad idea. It's dumb, right?
Yeah, like, she's like, it's just the amount of Liberal support there. Who's it? Marcy Lynn.
Yeah, no, I mean, what they should have done is what they should have done, and this is on May, I think a little bit too. May should have stepped down and campaigned with Annamie Paul in her riding in a by-election, where you would have a bunch of energized Green support. Turnout would be low in general because it's a by-election, and she'd probably win the seat. And then her rule over the Green Party, her like leadership over it, would be less questionable if she won the seat, and you wouldn't have the former leader getting a higher profile than her. I think that's probably the best move, because Toronto Centre is not it's not really a winnable riding, right? Like, unless the Liberals really tank in the last few days, I don't think she's going to win it.
No. Yeah, and then at that point, you know, obviously her leadership has to be thrown into question again, and it's going to be another leadership race. And if that happens, I hope Dimitri Lascaris wins. I know we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but I was a big supporter of his in the last leadership race, and I'm glad he has stayed on good terms with the party so far. So I think he's doing that, you know, knowing that he could potentially be in that position again. Yeah. So it's when it comes to the Greens, who knows what's possible.